Hi, welcome to Dear Grownups. I'm Jessica Branch. Today we're going to talk about a topic that is a little bit overwhelming but incredibly important. Today we're going to talk about IEPs, which is an Individualized Education Program. So whether you're a parent or you're a teacher, this episode is for you. We're going to talk about what an IEP is, what its purpose is, and then all of the different pieces of content in the IEP. Let's get started. The IEP document is one of the cornerstone pieces of the IDEA legislation. This law is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and it tells us that children with disabilities need access to free and appropriate public education, which sometimes we like to throw in another acronym when we're talking in education, and we call that FAPE, F-A-P-E. The IEP is a legally binding document. It tells what the school needs to provide for the child who qualifies for special education services. The IEP is created by a team of members from the school and the families of the child, the parents of the child. I'm going to show some backdrops of an IEP, and just know that the formatting may look different because every school district uses a different computer program. So they may use things like Infinite Campus, and their document may look different, but it's going to all have the same headings and the same pieces in the IEP document. Also, I want to let you know, as we go along, I'm going to put some of the pieces of the law on there. And it looks very confusing, and unless you're a lawyer, you may not understand the pieces. But I also think it is important for teachers to understand what the law is requiring of us. And I think it's important for families to understand the rights and services that your child is entitled to. At the beginning of an IEP document, you're going to see some demographic information. The first thing it's going to have on there, or should have on there, is the meeting date. And the reason that it has a meeting date on there is because IDEA law says that we need to have an IEP in place every year. So we're going to look at the meeting date, and then we're going to look at the start date and end date of the IEP. The meeting date and the start date of the IEP should be the same. So it's a requirement of the school to make sure that an IEP is updated at least every year. It could be updated more frequently if the IEP team, including the school personnel and the parents, feel that an IEP needs to be revised. It's also going to include information, obviously, about the student's name. The IEP is individualized, so your child's IEP and your neighbor's IEP should look different because they are individualized for that particular child. My children have had IEPs focusing on speech and language, and all three of their IEPs over the years have looked different, and that's exactly how it should be. It might also have things on there like your mailing address, your school district, child's date of birth, all of those demographic pieces of information. The next major section of the IEP is the present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. This is an important section because this tells anybody who's picking up this IEP who your child is and what they're currently able to do. This should be the basis of all of the decisions that the IEP team is making during the IEP meeting. It's important because if we don't know where the child is currently, we don't know what goals to set and being able to measure those goals to see how far they have progressed. So here's the legalese. It says how the child's disability affects the child's involvement and progress in the general education curriculum, i.e., the same curriculum as for non-disabled children or for preschool children as appropriate, how the disability affects the child's participation in appropriate activities. If the child is new to special education, in this area, you're going to see a lot of testing scores. These are the tests that were used to determine your child's eligibility for special education services. So you may see some scores on there for motor skills or communication skills. Those are all of the pieces and parts that were brought forth when the team was deciding whether or not the child would qualify for special education services. If this is a revision of an IEP, then in this area, you're going to have some things on how the child is doing in the everyday curriculum of their classroom. It is most likely going to be broken up into different components. Things like communication status, academic performance. So that's going to include things like reading, literacy, writing, science, health, vision, hearing, and motor skills, social emotional status, and general intelligence, so cognitive skills, problem solving skills, thinking about thinking, all of those things, functional vision and learning media assessment, and functional hearing, listening, and communication assessment. In these sections, if the child is receiving services focused on that area of performance, there needs to be a statement saying that the child is not performing at the same level as children who do not have a disability. And that's sometimes hard for parents to read, and it feels hard as a teacher to write, but that is also the key that unlocks services for your child. Some state forms have a box that needs to be checked that says either not an area of concern or performance commensurate, which is a weird word, with same similar aged peers. What that means is all of those skills are what we expect for children at that age level. If they are skills that we do not expect at that age level, then we may need to have some services to support the child in those areas. And that's where our measurable annual goals are going to focus. The information that shows up in this present levels area looks at both academic skills and functional skills. So how the child is able to participate in their general educational environment. And what the general curriculum means is wherever they would be if they did not have a disability. Where are their peers going for education? This information is collected from teachers, therapists, families and parents, any outside providers. You can put all of that information in that present levels. Whatever's going to give us a better picture of that child and what the child needs, it should be in that section. Next on the IEP is the special areas checkboxes. So it's a series of questions that you're either going to answer yes or no to. And the questions are, does the child's behavior impede his or her learning or that of others? And you check yes or no. And if you check yes, then you need to supply a behavior support plan in that place. Does the child have limited English proficiency? And you would check yes or no. Does the child have communication needs? And you would check yes or no. If you check yes, you can refer them back to the present levels of performance that we just talked about up there, or you can have a whole other section here. Is the child deaf or hard of hearing? Are assistive technology devices and services necessary in order to implement the child's IEP? So these would be things like low-tech devices or even AAC communication devices, or things like standers or wheelchairs, things like that in this section. And then there's a section that says Statement of Devices and Services. If the ARC, which is the Annual Review Committee, that's the committee that meets to talk about the IEP, if they answer yes to any of the questions above, then they need to have a statement of services or devices to be provided. So there's things like specially designed instruction. So if you have an IEP, you are going to have specially designed instruction. Are there any needs of supplementary aids and services? Do you need a behavior support plan on there, or other pieces that would need to support this IEP? The next major section is the measurable annual goals. This is what the student will work on over the course of a year. And this is what the therapist and the teacher, they will all try to support the child and help them progress in this area. The goals should be specific to the child and specific enough that when you see it, you will know that they are doing it. It should be measurable, so you know you can tally it, you can time it. You need to be able to measure their progress in that goal. Is it achievable in the next year or even shorter amount of time if you have smaller benchmarks? Is it relevant to the child? Does it make sense? Or was it just an item on some assessment that you used? It should be relevant. Another word we like to say is functional. Is this something that the child needs to use in their daily life, or is it something that children their same age without disabilities are able to do that we think this child should be able to do also? And is it time bound, meaning can we get this done in the next year? Meet those SMART objectives. It needs to tell us who is doing the thing. It should be the child. What is the skill or behavior that the child is doing? How? So, what manner, what level are they going to be doing it independently? Will they be doing it with assistance? Will they be prompted? How is it happening? Where is it happening? And when should this happen by? Here's the legalese again. It says a statement of measurable annual goals, including academic and functional goals designed to meet the child's needs that result from the child's disability, to enable the child to be involved in and make progress in the general education curriculum and meet each of the child's other educational needs that result of the child's disability. When the team writes the child's annual measurable goals, they're going to think about what is the child currently able to do and what does the child need to be able to do. And maybe what's in the middle, what is challenging for them yet attainable. And that middle ground, what's challenging yet attainable for them, is the goal that we would want them to meet by the end of the IEP year. You will also see in this section benchmarks and short-term objectives. These are the small steps that the child can take to meet the larger annual goal. So these might be time bound, so they might break it up into different months when they want this to happen, or it might be skill level bound. So things that would happen at a skill before the annual goal and those small steps to get there. In this area, it's also going to say something like method of measurement. And this is for the grown-ups. This is going to say how measurement on the progress of that annual goal or those short-term objectives and benchmarks is going to be collected. It's going to say things like anecdotal records, checklist, behavioral observations. It's going to tell you how the grown-ups in the scenario are going to collect data in order to determine if the child is meeting those goals or not. And they'll look at that criteria in the goal if it says 3 out of 5 times over a 3-week period. They're going to use that in order to look at their data and decide, has the child met the goal or objective? Some IEPs have one annual goal and some IEPs have several. It really depends on the needs of the child. The next area is specially designed instruction. Once again, we like to throw out another acronym, so you may hear this be described as SDI, but this really tells us what services the child needs on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis in order to meet those measurable annual goals. It has to contain a statement of the special education services and related services. When we're talking about specially designed instruction, we're also going to list out how often the child is receiving that service. The next section would look at supplementary aids, services, and accommodations. These are things that the child needs to succeed in the classroom. Examples could be behavioral supports, speech-to-text software. One section that we're not going to spend a lot of time on because I'm preschool and I don't encounter this often is assessment accommodations. And let me just tell you, it looks like a very confusing form, but what it lists is, does your child's disability affect the way that they're going to be able to take standardized assessments? And if it does, what services, what accommodations, and what modifications need to be in place so that way it's not the child's disability that is keeping them from taking that assessment or doing well on that assessment. On the IEP, we also have to talk about where the specially designed instruction is going to be implemented. So where is the child spending time during the school day? This is called least restrictive environment. Our goal is that we want the child to spend as much time with children their same age peers who do not have a disability. We want them to be spending as much time with them as possible. And if we have to take them away from that, we want to say why we're taking away from that and how it benefits the child. Why it's a good thing for the child to have some separate services or to be removed from this larger group. Sometimes it is in the child's best interest to be removed. But if we do that, we need to have a statement telling why the child is in a different environment than their peers. If they're with their peers, it's called the least restrictive environment. The more we take them away, the more restrictive it becomes. Your IEP, depending on where it's laid out in the format, will also have an area for extended school year services. And it may have a checkbox that says, are extended school year services required for the student? Yes, no, or more data needed. And what this says is, because we in the United States mostly operate on a fall to summer, and then we have summer at home schedule, what happens in the summer for those children? If we feel that the child is going to fall behind on their progress or they're going to regress, then we would provide them with some extended school year services. And in this area, we're going to talk about what those extended school year services are, how much, all of those things, or we're going to say we need to collect some more data to make that decision. So when we talk about what services the child is going to receive, some IEP forms have a beautiful chart that they use to look at the type of service and how often it's going to be implemented for that child. This particular one has the type of service in one column, the service minutes, so 30 minutes, 60 minutes, 15 minutes, how often, the service frequency, the period, is it going to happen daily, weekly, monthly, annually, when it's starting, when it's ending, and who is providing the service. What position are they? So is it the speech and language pathologist? Is it the occupational therapist? Is it the physical therapist? Is it the intervention specialist? And where it is going to be held, the location. So is it in the classroom, the resource room, the speech and language therapy room? But remember, what is ever put in that location, if it is not the general education classroom, then that also needs to show up on the least restrictive environment section to say why it's not being held in the general classroom. And some IEP forms will break up the specially designed instruction and the related services in those ways. So you'll have two different tables. And that's great because it just organizes everything perfectly. And if you have an older child with an IEP, there is a section called transition service. So if a child is 16 or even earlier, if the IEP team decides that that is appropriate, you will start to look at transition services. And that looks at how we're going to help that child be as independent as possible. We'll start to think about some post-secondary goals and what needs they'll have and what supports they'll need to be able to meet those goals. At the end of the IEP, all of the parties that are involved in the meeting are going to sign. The parents also sign saying that they agree and they want to implement this IEP. Let me just tell you, if you're a parent and you're a little bit uncomfortable with anything that happens at the IEP, you do not have to sign on the spot. You can take some time to look over it. If your spouse was not able to come with you or your advocate was not able to come with you to the meeting, you absolutely can take what you've got gathered at that IEP meeting and make a decision with your spouse and come back. You can ask for another meeting. You absolutely don't need to feel pressure to sign at that meeting. There you have it. The overview of the IEP is not as scary as it seems. As a parent or a teacher, you are a crucial part of the team. Your input, your questions, all of that is so important. So don't be afraid to share those things at the team meetings and even before, because those pieces of information that you share are ultimately going to help the child. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to share it with a friend. Together, we can make the IEP process a tool for success. See you next time on Dear Grown-Ups.